So is it that PowerPoint? Got it. Okie doke.
Okay, can you hear me now and see me?
Yes, we can hear and see you.
Woohoo, yay, success on the technology here. Third time's a charm and all that. So are we ready to start with the piece tonight, or is there anything we need to do first, Jason?
We're getting there.
Whoa, nice echo. Okay. Let me go ahead and just simply get started here by looking at what we were trying to do this year, which is basically we went back out to market. We were looking at competitive salary levels, you know, all of that. We did something a little different this year, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. We reviewed all your job descriptions, and then obviously we're doing this presentation and telling you about the results and recommendations kind of thing. And what we did differently this year, we're going to talk about. Am I screaming?
Bola needs to.
Okay, just.
Linda, if you tell her what slide that you're on, that way she can coordinate.
Awesome. I'm on slide 3 now. We're going to talk about deliverables. And then we're going to get into process for a little bit in terms of what we're doing. But the competitive review of compensation, again, as most of you know, the market's been a little bit crazy this year, virtually across the board. We are recommending some changes to your pay structures, which is typical. And then obviously we've got this presentation tonight sort of summarizing what we found, the data collected, and what our recommendations are for you. So moving on to slide 5, just from a process review, obviously the first thing we did was to confirm that we were going to use the same set of comparators. Our survey process this year was a little bit different. I want to talk to you a little bit about what we did and why we did it that way. For the first time, typically we do a survey where we put all your positions in, we go out to a device and we give all your job descriptions, and then the other cities do the matching. This year, we simply asked those cities, because there's a lot of work going on in this area, to send us their job descriptions and to send us their classification piece, and then we did the matching internally. As a result, we have a few more matches. Obviously, we've got lots of experience matching jobs, and so we were able to find some matches that we didn't have before. So obviously from that, then we obviously put the data together, did some analysis on it, and then did a data review with Jason. And we have some recommendations for you. And then obviously the last thing is our presentation to you today, and then whatever follow-up we need to do. So just as a refresher, in slide 6, you're going to be looking at exactly the same set of comparators you've always had. We have one challenge to our comparators. We've always had 100% participation for you in the past. Frontenac, for an extended period of time, has been going through a pay study, and they are not even at the point where they could share job descriptions because they're being revamped and revised and revamped and revised. So that is the only comparator that we were missing their data for. So the comparator, obviously, I've moved on now to slide 7. One comparator was simply unable to participate. That's Frontenac that I talked about. I think we want to talk about the statistics, because one of the things that we always do is to kind of tell you what we did for you. In this particular year for uniform, we only looked at the 95th percentile within one standard deviation. Historically, we have run multiple scenarios for you. This year, because you had made those decisions in the prior survey, we only ran what you were currently working with as your philosophy. For non-uniform, we did the same thing. We have the average, but we worked again with the 75th percentile within one standard deviation for all of those jobs. So that I think is kind of a key piece in terms of what we did this year versus prior years. So we haven't been sort of what about this and what about that kind of generating multiple scenarios for you to have to consider. Moving on to slide 8, one of the things that those pay grids and job descriptions, as I said, came to us for matching. And it was really key for us that one of the things we did very early on this time is we actually met with your department heads to hear any specific concerns they had as we were heading into 2023. The uniform had a couple of positions for some additional pricing that they wanted looked at, and you're going to hear a little bit about that later. And the non-uniform, what we heard was a lot about those hire rates being too low for current market conditions and being able to recruit. And I guess as any of you who are in business know, it has been a really rough year for recruiting, and lots of ghosting and some other stuff going on in terms of trying to get the right help in the door. So those were what we learned and what we were trying to pay close attention to as we went through your study this year. So here's what we found. For fire, obviously, you know that firefighter EMT classification has historically been a challenge because it's a grandfathered role for the organizations that you compare yourself against. You only have 3 comparators. Nobody's hiring into the classification. And this is one that we haven't adjusted for many years. So what we did is to look at the average increase in structure, rounded it up to 3%, and adjusted the range for this classification. I believe it's been something like 7 years with no adjustment to that range. And so we did that because we were in talking to the other comparators that have this role, they've taken that same sort of approach. It just isn't showing up in their data, because what they're doing is simply adjusting ranges. And many of them have gotten to the point where these roles are retiring off the roles. So they just don't have many people in them. So they're handled as a one-off. Fire had a request for us to look at an engineer classification and add that to the structure. What we found when we looked at it, and again, one of the really key parts of having them send us all of their classification data, as well as their job descriptions, what we learned is that less than 3 people have this as a separate classification on their structure. But you do have, I think it's 2 of the 3, who actually pay a stipend if they're assigned as primary of $2,500 a year. Brentwood, we have a recommendation in place for you that would add that same stipend to your structure, but it's dependent upon your promotional process, obviously. You have to be assigned as primary, and you do have to attain a CDL. And that was a part of what came through those department head discussions that we had, is that the department head feels real strongly about that attainment of a CDL. So some of those are EMTs, some are probably paramedics. And again, it will be handled as a stipend, but they have to go through your traditional promotional process in order to receive that, should you approve it tonight. Or I guess I'm not saying you're approving things tonight, sorry.
Yeah, if you've got questions.
Could I just, what is CDL?
Sorry, it is a certification that drivers get.
Oh, got it.
Driving a certain weight of vehicle.
Thank you.
Okay. So the uniform decisions that are required, you have a request to add a police lieutenant classification, and we've got some discussion around that later in the presentation. You've got the engineer stipend, and then we have taken a little different approach by giving that generic increase to the ranges for your firefighter EMT. And we took that same approach to corporal on the police side, because it falls into that same category where just not many people have that classification. And so trying to get a real solid feel for what the ranges are is pretty easy, because not many people have them, but it makes it difficult to compare against. And your guys have been sitting there for quite a while, again, with no change in ranges because of that. We did not look at the cost of these this year. Jason's going to be doing that for you this year. And then we did put in a pay grid as a separate attachment so that you can kind of look at that. One of the things we did on that lieutenant classification that I think you're going to want to look at, your chief feels very strongly that they need additional supervision. So we actually went back to all of your comparators and said, tell me how many officers you have, police officers, the boots on the ground kind of thing, and then give me how many layers, if you will, do you have above that? Do you have a sergeant, a general, that kind of thing, and on up the ladder to chief. And so we put that information together for you, as well as the full size of the police departments in question, as well as I think Jason also added the square miles covered by a particular city. So you've got some information behind you to kind of make an informed decision with respect to approving that additional classification. Questions on this? Because this, I think, is really key in terms of the number of decisions you're making are squarely on the uniform side. I think we've got a couple on the non-uniform, but they're pretty minor compared to these.
I don't think so. I'm not seeing any.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to slide 11. Non-uniform, again, kept the same philosophy, 75th percentile, one standard deviation. We evaluated the ranges based on maximum and minimum of the comparator ranges. Again, because hiring is so critical this year, we adjusted from the minimum of the range to reflect the current market. Again, you're trying to get people in the door, and that's been the challenge, not just for Brentwood, pardon me, but for a lot of folks, is actually to get them through the door. And so again, when we looked at your ranges, we wanted to make sure that those minimums were such that you could compete with your comparator group, if you will. And again, the cost of implementation, Jason's doing for you this year, so that we don't have that. But we do have the pay grid for you as we're looking at it. And we think it's really key that you do sort of shift from looking at the top end of your range when you're setting those steps to the entry points, because that's where your difficulty has been. And so that's what we've changed this year. Questions on this one before we move on to slide 12?
I have a question. Is it, I mean, I know not every job classification, but is it accurate to say that one of the reasons we're having difficulty with filling these non-uniform positions is that some of them can compete with sort of the private sector, and that sometimes just comparing ourselves with a comparator city doesn't really fill in the whole picture?
Certainly, especially if you're looking at like your sanitation drivers and some of those, that is absolutely true. Maintenance workers, the same. But I think what's really key is when we looked at it, when you look at the hiring ranges for people, especially like maintenance workers, mechanics, sanitation drivers, the kinds of things that could flow to an outsourced vendor, if you will, or go across the street, whatever. What we're finding is that your comparators have consistently raised their minimums in order to compete in the local market. And that's reflected with your comparator group. Some things we are not suggesting you do. For example, if you actually float out of the website and you're looking for a sanitation driver with some of the companies locally that many cities outsource to. And one of the things you'll find is that they're offering things like sign-on bonuses and retention stuff and that kind of thing in order to get people through the door. So their entry points don't look all that different from a city, but what they're doing behind the scenes to kind of get people in and then kind of keep them there is different than what a city can do. And I think that's why a lot of your comparators have adjusted their ranges midstream this year for some of those roles. And you're going to see that when we talk about which jobs we're not only suggesting that range movement for, but you've got some that we need to change the classification or the grade on, because the movement has been greater than the average that we moved it.
Alderman Gould?
So if we move,
Oh, sorry.
Well, I've got a question.
Sorry.
When you talk about adjusting the minimum ranges, which I totally understand why we need to do that, but doesn't that adjust the maximum as well? Because aren't the steps based on where you start, and then, or can you adjust the minimum and not change what the maximum is?
Not really, not without creating a lot of compression. So yes, once we adjusted that minimum of the range, we took it all the way through to the maximum. But what you find is when you're looking at that data for a particular position, you're right in the sweet spot in terms of starting at the minimum. Your maximums aren't out of alignment with the rest of the comparators, because we check that. Historically, we have really looked at the top end for you, and then we started that primarily because that's where we did the uniform, because they were so highly compensated compared to your comparator group.
Mm-hmm.
So we just carried that right on through to non-uniform initially, and the ranges weren't moving that much. But over the past year, with all of the hiring difficulty, we've seen some pretty significant adjustments in some places. And we're going to talk about what those are if we move on to slide 12.
Can I add one statement to that to help clarify his question?
Sure.
On the the range is removed universally from the lower end of the range to the higher end of the range. The consideration for that was in that second bullet on slide 11, which had to do with looking at your comparators, looking at the minimums of theirs in comparison versus to the maximums. So the minimum of those comparators is what was used for the evaluation to do the range adjustments universally. Does that help clarify?
That does. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks. Sure. Let's move on to slide 12. Don't let the numbers surprise you, but your entire range structure, pardon me, for non-uniform had to be adjusted up 5.7% just to reach the minimum of the marketplace for you. And even with that, if you're talking about which jobs are moving more than that almost 6% in the market today, your maintenance worker classifications, we're suggesting that you move up a grade as well. The sanitation drivers, we found some very interesting things around this particular position where people are, some of your comparators, are sort of playing with their classification in order to get this role higher. And one in particular classifies them as heavy equipment operators in order to get their pay rates up. Mechanics have been going up, not as much as the others, but more than 5.7%. The inspectors and also your HR manager role. Again, when you're looking at many of these, they could go outside the public sector for jobs. We did not change the percentages going step to step. So although we adjusted from the minimum that was found in the marketplace, we kept that same percentage from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 kind of thing. Questions? Okay, I'm just hearing silence and I can't read faces. I'm seeing Darren only on my screen, so.
Oh, we are not seeing any
No.
Alderwoman Tice.
Not seeing any questions either.
We're not shy with questions, so.
Yeah, well.
Okay, just want to be sure. All right, let's move on then to slide 13, because I'm going to talk a little bit about next steps and kind of what you really may want to be looking at. From our perspective, you've got some pretty easy, it's never an easy decision, but compared to what we have found historically that you've had to deal with, I think it's a pretty simple kind of piece. And that is, you got to approve or reject those additional classifications in uniform. And I think this is sort of a preference and decision making and that kind of thing. And as I said, especially with the add of that police lieutenant, there's a lot more data that would suggest there is probably a reason why your police chief thinks that he needs more supervision. But again, when you look at that data, I think it probably will sort of, a decision will be apparent to you in terms of where you may want to go there. I think the stipend for engineer, we can't create a separate classification because it just doesn't exist in the marketplace. But for those who do have, the designated engineer, you've got a good plan in place. And we heard a really good synopsis of making sure that they had the CDL and they get the certification, and they've got to be assigned as a primary. It can't be somebody who just drives because somebody else wasn't there, kind of thing. So I think some really good process pieces are in place in order to pay that stipend. So again, you have a strong recommendation from us that we think that's probably the right way to approach that engineering classification. And the other thing on the uniform side is the difference in approach we took with that firefighter, EMT, and corporal, where the market just simply doesn't have those classifications and they haven't been adjusted for a while. And so we're using the average in the uniform kind of community, if you will, of the 2.7% to adjust those ranges for the individuals who are holding those. Questions on the approvals that we're kind of throwing out there at you? Okay. Then you've got the classification system, which we've got, which we're presenting before you to approve for the uniform. Again, what you're seeing are some pretty modest changes in terms of the ranges for those, and then the 2 additional kind of pieces. For non-uniform, again, building from the higher rates, that's just a reflection of market. We do have those, I think it's 5 classifications where we're suggesting that the grade needs to change as well because they're moving more than 6% in the marketplace. And then obviously there's the need for approval of the grade and step structure for 2023 for non-uniform. questions for me. I know this is really brief compared to where we've been. Would you like to go talk about police lieutenants and the additional survey work we did on that? Or what do you think? Where would you like to go from here?
I think that sounds like a good topic to start on.
Okay, let's move over to slide 16. And Jason, any place you want to move me around, feel free to do that because this was a joint effort. One of the things that we really tried to do when we were looking at that staffing survey is how many layers do you really have, or what's your ratio, if you will? And so when we're looking at, and those are just the numbers in front of you. So for example, Chesterfield has 77 boots on the ground, is my terminology, and they've got 20 people supervising those 77, if you will. Clayton is 29 and 12, 27 and 13, 30 and 8. So you have a variety of looks at this data, if you will. And again, Brentwood's boots on the ground is pretty small when you look at the ratio of officers or supervision, if you will, to boots on the ground. Jason, what would you add to that? There's no reason for me to read each individual city for them.
The only other thing that I would add is that I had created a secondary spreadsheet that was also uploaded that was just an expansion of the next slide that you had that also included the square miles, the population of the city, and that type of data, just so that you've got kind of a more visual representation.
Okay, and if you want to move on to slide 17, because I know you guys can look at that here in a minute. The way we really started with this was to look at, what does Brentwood have and what are you asking for, kind of thing. And then from my perspective, we were really looking at, you've got 3 layers between an officer and the chief, if you will. So those numbers along the bottom, sort of the levels of supervision, I think really tie back in nicely to that staffing survey piece we looked at earlier. So what you're really seeing, and that's sort of the notes on the bottom of that spreadsheet, is 9 out of 12 or 75% only need 3 layers between their boots on the ground and their chief. What you're looking for is, again, you're adding another layer. So the question is, do you need that? And that's not my call to make. And unfortunately, the only one we couldn't do, and so we excluded it from the chart you're looking at, is Frontenac, because they simply are not anywhere close to being ready to share information or even finalize their internal stuff. Questions for me, because this is the end of my prepared remarks, if you will.
Linda, you removed DePere as well, and why was that?
Oh, I did remove DePere, but I removed DePere because if you will recall, there's sort of public safety as opposed to just police. And so we wanted to make sure we were apples to apples comparison, because we also exclude them from looking at your mins and maxes when we look at those jobs, because it's not an exact match.
I'd like to make one quick clarification just for the record so that everybody's aware. What the police department was actually asking for was to elevate 2 of our existing sergeants to the position of lieutenant, not necessarily a given sergeant per se, but elevate 2 of those. So our number of supervisors would not change. All that would change would be the compensation for said supervisors, and we would be basically adding an additional layer of supervision. The kind of mentality would be that the detective sergeant and the training sergeant would be the 2, theoretically, that would be elevated to the position of a lieutenant. So again, the total number of the department with regards to that would not change. It would just simply add an additional layer of supervision in there. I just want to make sure that was clear.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that there's not an additional staff being requested, but rather just sort of a reassignment of existing staff, right? You're not hiring 2 new people.
Correct.
To make those promotions.
Correct.
That ratio of lieutenant, sergeant, corporal, stay the same going forward, or?
Well, I think one of the other things that would be part of the budgetary process, and I don't necessarily want to get into that as of right now, but I think the police department was requesting additional officers. So that ratio would change as time went by, depending on whether or not the budget requests were approved. But as of today, or, you know, the implementation of this as it stands, no, that would not change. But if we continue to add members to the department, then obviously as time goes by, that ratio would change.
Alderwoman
Yeah,
Tyson? Oh, sorry.
go
Linda-
ahead.
Oh, is this something that the Public Safety Committee has talked about at all, and about the restructuring in the department separate from like the HR piece and why it's necessary? Is that something that's come out of that committee, or are we the?
You're the first. It
Okay.
has not gone to that committee.
Yeah,
And
prove me
so-
wrong with the film, but we have talked about adding additional officers, but not this
But not
structure.
this.
Not this,
And
okay.
because this is part of the compensation study, it's coming to you first, and certainly like what you all recommend, go back to the other committee and present this. But right now, you're the first to see it.
Okay.
So if you look at, I go back to slide 16, because I think this sort of gives you a sense of, I think I would be asking why the need for additional supervision. Because when you look at it, Webster Groves has 12 people supervising 33. I don't know that you're going to double your police department, but you already have more in supervision, that kind of thing. So I would want to look at those total boots on the ground against how many layers of management do you need? And is there a reason why, for example, that you need more in supervision than a Webster Groves or a Richmond Heights or, somebody like that? Kirkwood at 43 has 15 people. So they've got 2 more people in management or supervision, but they've got 43 officers that are being supervised. So I don't have a crystal ball in terms of what the differences might be between cities, but that's sort of in your role. Probably what I would be asking is there something that is unique about Brentwood that would create a need for more supervision than is typical with your comparators, with 75% of your comparators?
So we have Major McIntyre, who's subbing for Chief Spees. Do you think you have the answer to that question? If you want to
I mean, it
recognize
depends.
him.
I do want to, come on down. But I think that does, depending on how long of a discussion this becomes, I certainly think that would be a great topic for public safety to chew on. I mean, because I feel like the purview of Ways and Means is, can we afford it, and where do we get the money? I mean, but in terms of philosophically, is adding these lieutenant classifications? I mean, I feel like that's kind of a public safety. I'd like to have public safety weigh in on that. Being that Alderman Plufka does such a marvelous job leading us through those issues. But I mean, if you can give us a preview, I mean, if we kick that out, that issue, because if that's, I want everybody to kind of be walking together on this, is that something that we could take up at the next meeting, which I think might be a weekend from now?
Absolutely. So
Without running afoul of any of the budget
So that
timeline.
on this agenda, there is, I'm going to try to bring it up real quick. Let me just.
While Bowl is looking that up, I can just tell you, based on the dollar figure, we would be looking to implement that would be approximately $14,000.
For the first year.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So on the agenda, under number 5, departmental report, no, that's wrong. Under 4, still under city administrator report, number F, there's the fiscal year 2023 personnel request. And in that memo, there are multiple departments that are requesting additional personnel. So because this is part of what we've modeled into this compensation study, that's why it always comes first to this committee. And then you direct staff to take it to the respective committees and then bring back a recommendation. So we're just following the same path. And
Okay, great.
what you've said is accurate. It's the process we've used in the past.
Alderwoman Tice?
Could I request that when the Public Safety Committee looks at the, this police officer level, that they also discuss the engineer designation within the fire,
Okay.
just from
sounds
a
good.
conceptual standpoint?
We can do that. We'll put both on the agenda.
As tempting as it is to elbow out all other committees on subject matter, like to,
Yeah,
I, so I think you can sit, yeah, we'll dive into that one at length. Alderman Gould?
Yeah, I do have a follow-up question as it relates to non-uniform and the approved grade changes or potential of range building from higher rates. That's not only in an effort to increase our acquisition numbers of new hires, but also it's a retention ability as well, yes?
100%.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. That's why you, and again, what we were very careful to do was to look at compression issues. So just to adjust the front end of your range might get more people through the door, but then the folks who are already there are going to begin to get squeezed by the new folks. So you have to keep that moving. You're absolutely right.
I think it's important to recognize that we need to keep the good folks that we have on staff as much as we can.
To that end, one of the things that we did is we look at the spreadsheet that was the implementation cost portion. Early on, when the city initially brought Linda Higbee on several years back, one of the things that was talked about was trying to kind of correct some historical deficiencies, if you will, with regards to where certain staff members were placed. And we ended up, we haven't really done that to date. The final document that you have in front of you, again, it does include the engineer and the lieutenant promotion positions in there, but it also reflects the correction for approximately 3 individuals that fell into that category as well. And that, in and of itself, lends to the retention efforts that Alderman Gould referenced.
Thank you.
Other questions? So what are our next steps?
It seems that we can, we have the initial direction to take the 2 positions that are public safety related to public safety. There is none for planning. There is for parks. So I imagine that we take for parks to Public Works Committee. And then there's one from finance. So that's here.
I'm happy to, I would be pleased to have Public Works look at the proposed
Okay.
hires, if that's.
Sure.
Well, we're gonna, I mean, let's have the committees look at it, because then, they'll do a deep dive, and that'll make it easier for us to make decisions as a full board, I think. So, I mean, if that's the direction that you need from us on those matters.
So there is a memo in here. Have you all taken a look at the memo? Because we have that scheduled for presentation so that you just get a very high level of what has been presented.
Which memo, there were,
So it's number 5. It's called personnel.
in section
It's-
5?
Yes, section 5. Fiscal year 2023 personnel request. I mean, not 5, it's 4. City Administrator
Oh,
Report
4F.
F.
Okay, got it.
Well, I guess I would see that as different. Those are actually requests that are for new positions going in the budget. And I see
Right.
that as completely different from how are we going to reclassify current employees? So,
Okay.
I
So
don't know.
do you want to take that on Ways and Means? The 4F?
Well, I'm not the chair, but
Oh, excuse me.
So, I mean, what the, what are we're moving on.
Want to come up?
I mean, certainly
Oh. Maybe we might be moving around a little bit, but they're all related. So if you would recognize Eric to come and present that? And so then you can
But-
discuss and then decide what direction you want us to, pursue for that.
Okay, so are we just moving on to 4F? I didn't want to,
Well,
I mean, I will work.
And what about the
Eric.
cost? Like, I guess I'm sort of,
so that's really where we should go next, because that's B on the agenda. So why don't we do that, and then
Okay.
we'll get to that. And Linda, should Linda stay online? Or not?
Well, I guess at this point, we have our recommendations, right? I mean, it's in the, or,
Will Linda have
I mean, I think
anything to add to
we
that?
have a
Probably not.
recommendation for the uniform next steps that we need to consider. The non-uniform, I think, is that something that we need to decide on or
It would be
talk
this
about
committee
tonight,
as well,
or-
yes.
I mean, I would then make a motion to move forward with the recommendation for non-uniform in approving the range from build for higher rates and recommended grade changes as presented.
I'll second that. But are we ignoring these steps? So you're skipping the step
No,
structure? 'cause it's
step
going-
structure
okay.
for non-uniform.
For okay.
Yes, the whole non-uniform recommendation.
So so this is for non-uniform, that your motion, right?
Yes.
And then, you're gonna wait until, I don't know what you wanna do, quite frankly.
Wait
I'm
for
confused.
I mean,
Public
we can,
safety?
we can take on the non-uniform now, but public safety, it sounds like we need more discussion among the, as
Committee.
far as classifications
Yes,
and the
that's
stipend
true. Before
from the
you can
committee,
fully
before
take
we
it on
can
as
take
a,
that on.
you're right.
Okay, well, I just seconded the motion, but I will say that we were gonna send the recommended grade. Were we sending the recommended grade thing to public works? Three of us are on public
I
works.
thought what
so-
you were sending to public safety is the lieutenant, and then the firefighter engineer.
Right.
Correct.
So then when a recommendation comes back, then you'll consider uniform as a whole, correct?
Right.
that was my understanding.
Yeah, but
Okay.
were we gonna punt the step structure to public works, or should we just do that here?
So that's different. Public Works,
yeah.
you said, the new positions,
Those are new
you'll
hires.
take it on here. So, and that's on the agenda, so it can wait until we get to that item. And then you can just, after you hear the presentation, you can decide what you want to do. Maybe.
That worked.
Jason, do you have the cost numbers? I
Yeah.
know that's where you guys were headed initially, and I guess what was really before you is whether you want me to hang around on the phone or get off.
Well-
And I can do either
Can we
one.
drop this? Can I?
I think the primary concern for Linda, were she to hang around, would be for on the non-uniform side, if there were questions with regards to the restructuring or the moving of the positions that Linda had indicated in the presentation. But based on Alderman Gould's motion and the second, that kind of encompasses that. So unless you had specific questions for Linda regarding the restructuring of the positions indicated, I don't know if we need Linda further, but I don't want to speak for the board members.
That's the spreadsheet that I.
Is that in the PDF
Titled
towards the end?
comp,
No, it's not.
It's not in the presentation.
compensation 20, no?
It's the compensation implementation
Okay.
final.
Final.
And bear in mind that this spreadsheet, I sanitized it to take names out of it and the like, but it does include a couple of assumptions, those assumptions being the inclusion of the lieutenant and the engineer positions. So that number, to put this forward, would be inflated by those inclusions.
So what's reflected in this spreadsheet, if we said yes to all, am I following you? That
Yes,
the
ma'am.
increase would be 534,000 and change?
Yes, and actually, there was one position that had recently gotten hired and wasn't included on this, so the formal number is 536.
Okay.
That was a new maintenance position. It happened after I created the spreadsheet, so I apologize.
But that number includes the uniform personnel as well.
It does.
Not-
That
not
number
broken
is-
out just non-uniform.
Correct. That number is all-inclusive, and I should also point out, per the bottom of that spreadsheet, it also includes two currently vacant positions. So that number, while it appears to be high, is because there's approximately $144,000 of that number is represented by personnel that are not currently here. So I did break down at the very bottom of that spreadsheet each of the various departments, so public safety, the general fund, sanitation, and parks and rec. So the public safety portion would be $219,000. If you factor out the approximate $14,000 for the lieutenants and $7,500 for the engineers, that drops you down to about $195,000 and change. And then again, in total, you're looking at 536, but that includes $144,000 of positions that are currently vacant.
I just want to, so the lieutenant is not listed, you just baked it in the number, you didn't necessarily change.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, what I did was, and I'm big into spreadsheets and color coding, so I apologize.
No, I just
I
wanted to
didn't,
make sure it
so if you
wasn't
look
wrong.
down on that spreadsheet, there is the very last of the police. It says police sergeant, detective, sergeant training. On the far right, the 105 would be if those two individuals were promoted. They're currently capped at their position. That's one of the only positions that did not receive a rate increase this time. However, last go-round, it received a substantive increase. So that 105 number includes, is the 98 plus the one, up to the 105. I hope I didn't speak too much. Okay.
So I guess I'm kind of confused on what our next steps are. Do you need us to approve, or are you asking for us to consider, I mean, is now the appropriate time to discuss whether we can afford this, or are we just having an informational session tonight? I mean, I know there's a motion on the floor just as to non-uniform.
Well, I'll interject that this is our philosophy, so, I mean, if we
Yeah.
can't,
Funding it is a different issue.
funding is a different issue, but if this is our philosophy, and this was what the market says, then I feel like we need to find the money for,
Exactly.
we need to find the money for this.
Yeah, I mean,
I
that's-
think that the situation with the police and fire is a little different, because those are substantive changes to the positions, but this other, I mean, and maybe sanitation as well, but that would,
Right.
but,
You all had been having the discussion about sanitation and had asked us to take a look at it and see what we can bring forward so that it could be considered for implementation before January of next year. So what we have here, if there is discussion and maybe consensus, then there could possibly be a motion, a motion to take this to the board for adoption effective September 1. And maybe part of the questions I think you probably should ask particularly about that is some of the questions you asked before, and to make sure that we've incorporated that. And I think Linda covered that in her PowerPoint presentation about how they're unique. You know, most cities have third-party vendors who provide that service, and they offer bonuses, sign-up bonuses, retention, all that. So she's answered those questions, or they changed the title. So you could have a separate discussion about that because that's part of non-uniform. And then all the other things that she mentioned, so probably talking too much.
Yeah, I'll table the motion to, I think in general, the challenge that we've seen over the past several years with non-uniform and hiring and retaining quality employees is something we need to pay attention to. The market changes, and I think this demonstrates that a need to shift our minimums and every step in between in order to be competitive. So I think it's really important that we do so. But if there's more discussion that needs to be had regarding whether or not we change classifications of sanitation worker to heavy equipment operator in order to be more competitive, I think that's something that we need to probably do, as long as it doesn't, prolong this process and put us in any challenges.
And I think what Linda, so I let Linda speak for herself if she thinks that what is in the compensation schedule puts the city in a competitive position for that particular classification, job description. So I'm talking about sanitation
And
in
I think
particular.
that's something that should probably go back to Public Works and have Dan weigh in on as well.
Dan, so we have met with Dan. All of this was in discussion with the department directors before we finalized this, so there's.
I'm
I'd
talking
like
about
to
the
say there's-
committee is what.
Well,
know,
you meant Public
should
Works
the-
Committee?
The committee be able to have a discussion about whether or not a classification change should happen.
I don't
you know.
think that they're talking about
I
reclassifying sanitation.
No,
I thought they were just looking
If
to
I could kind of
increase.
It's just
interject,
the
if you
salary,
wouldn't
yeah.
mind. Remember that one of the things we do is we match jobs, regardless of what somebody else is calling them, based on content, skill, and scope. So when you're looking at the market values, the higher rates and so on for a sanitation person, that encompass the folks who tried to play games, if you will, with their titling, because it's content to content. So
Correct.
the discussion of what you want to call them whatever you want. What we priced was the content of that job in the marketplace. I'm just telling you that sometimes when people go, I don't see that classification, that's why. It's because people are kind of playing with the titles because they already have a title called heavy equipment operator. And if they can push these guys into that title, they don't have to go back through a committee like you in order to get them pay raises. So just keep that in the back of your mind, is that when you're looking at what we're recommending for your sanitation driver, we're talking about content, regardless of what somebody else called it. And that's one of the things and one of the reasons why we asked people to send us their job descriptions and send us their classifications, is so that we could indeed sort of ferret out those kinds of situations.
If I may, the one thing I do want to point out with regard specifically to sanitation, item C under the city administrator's report is addressing the sanitation effective more or less immediately. Now, granted, that would be under our current plan, and then it would just simply slide into next year. It's just more or less implementing what Linda's recommendations are for next year. In other words, moving it a grade, but it would be under the current grade, not the proposed grade for next year, if that makes sense. So item C fully addresses the sanitation. I just want to make sure that we're not arguing or
Yeah, no,
going
I
back
think
and
it's
forth
best
over an
then to
item that's
table, I'm
already
going
on
to table my motion so that we can get through the rest of the information and possibly have a better informed discussion at the next meeting.
Yeah, then I'll
Table your second.
table my second, yeah.
Sounds good.
So are we, well, are we talking sanitation? I mean,
Well, why don't we go back to the agenda? Does anybody have any more questions about the compensation plan report? So that was informational. And so I think, given that I'm not seeing any other questions, I think Linda can, or is there, do you?
well, I have
are you-
questions on C, so, yeah, so,
Okay. So, yeah, Linda, if you wouldn't mind, if you could hang on. But why don't we, if there are no more questions about the compensation plan report,
Go ahead, keep
we
sharing.
can move on to item 4B, right?
So B is just simply the spreadsheet that I had referenced before, where I alluded to that dollar figure, the 536,000, with the 144,000 being for currently vacant positions. So I don't know how much more detail you want me to go into with regards to that. I can break it down by each of the departments, but you have that data. Were there any questions with regards to that spreadsheet, the color-coded spreadsheet that Bola has shared on the screen?
so can I ask you why you included the 144? Because, like, we're looking at the difference, I mean, I guess I can just subtract out 144, but.
Right. Well, the
If
reason
you're
that I wanted to make sure that was understood is the base number, okay, when you look in the very first column that has the 2022 final salaries, because those positions are vacant, that's why it says NA. So, you know, if that position, as an example, for the assistant finance director were filled, then it would be currently approximately, say, $80,000. Well, then that number would be then reflected at the very bottom, and so the implementation of that would be a lesser amount. I just wanted to make sure that you had all the information at hand and understood that to implement this, this wasn't going to be an additional 536,000 because 144 of it is kind of already budgeted, if that makes sense.
So effectively it's 400,000, I mean, round number.
Approximately, yeah.
Approximately.
Yes, ma'am.
10,000.
And again, of that, a large portion is police and fire, which comes from Prop P.
So in terms of if we were, let's say, inclined to, adopt a philosophy, go forward, be consistent with our philosophy, here is what it costs to do the changes that we see on the spreadsheet, and then I'm just thinking of flow, is the next process in this stage now to find out where might we find the money to fund this?
That
Yes,
will
ma'am.
be part of the budget process.
So we don't need to make a decision about this, but in terms of voting to recommend adding these, or
I think when you're at the point of adopting the compensation plan, I think you need to adopt it before we present the budget. Otherwise, we don't know what number we're putting in here. So whatever process it takes to take it to Ways and Means, Public Safety, Public Works, there needs to be some sort of conclusion to that process before we bring the budget.
so we need a consensus, one way or the other.
Right.
On the positions that are being proposed about whether we're going to go forward.
Right. Exactly. Are you going to continue to adopt your philosophy and then accept or adopt the changes that the compensation consultant has presented? All of them.
Okay, so I don't want to go back on the philosophy, so I feel like we need to do this and not revisit that again, because we spent a long time doing that. But I guess my question, sort of for Linda, sort of for Bola and Jason, with the additional changes in some of these job descriptions, like classifications, changing these classifications, do you feel like that's enough to recruit people? And then additionally, in those positions and all positions, do we feel like this is enough to keep people?
I think the short answer to that is yes. Honestly, one of the reasons that I had spoken with Dan of Public Works with regards to, as an example, the item C, the sanitation, is we've had an incredibly difficult time recruiting that position. To put it into perspective, we've had, fortunately, we have 3 trucks, okay? We've had 1 employee through the entirety of COVID. The other 2 positions one has remained vacant the entire time. The other position has turned over 3 times, the longest of which the employee lasted 3 months. The shortest was 3 days. So by potentially implementing item C, that will help us in the short term. And then if this program gets enacted for plan year 23, I think we're in a much better place going forward. Again, the sanitation workers are one of those positions that we're not just competing against a Kirkwood or St. Charles. We're competing against the guy who delivers bread to Schnucks. There's a whole litany of folks that we're competing against. Granted, our benefits and our other aspects of the organization will definitely help us, but most folks look at that bottom line. And if we increase to the numbers that Ms. Higbee had indicated, I think we're in a good position. I can't guarantee it.
Dan is on vacation this week. Otherwise, he'd be here and speak to this himself. And what we did different about the process was that we brought in all the department directors early, met with Linda, found out what concerns, questions, what they wanted to have a discussion on in the early stages. And I think they were satisfied. So I see Chief Cottrell shaking his head at the back of the room. Eric, do you agree? That they were more inclusive in the process. So, and I think we've achieved that. I'm comfortable with what we have before us, and I think it puts us in a better position. We've talked about how, I think for the most part this year, a lot of the maintenance workers in Public Works who are tasked with doing streets and sidewalks have been doing sanitation.
Yeah.
And I've been going around on days just visiting with them. They're happy doing that work. They love it, but what they've really been hired to do, we can't get to it because it's important to pick up the trash.
And I've said before, we're really overpaying for trash because we have people in other job classifications.
That's absolutely right.
So we're paying way more than even,
We are.
so we got to solve, that's one we've really got to solve.
I mean, I have crew leaders that are switching over and picking up trash as well. And so in addition to their base compensation, they're also receiving a stipend to do that. So yes, we're paying more than what we're asking here just to get the job done. All the while, their normal duties are potentially falling by the wayside.
So do you need a motion to try to implement the sanitation compensation now so that it could be?
Well, I haven't presented that document, but that's item C. I mean, if you want to approve it before I talk, then by all means, please do. In essence, what I was looking, if the chair would allow me to go to item C.
Moving on to, I mean, it seems like some of these issues overlap to one
They do.
another.
That's why they're
So-
grouped together.
So I guess perhaps, to the extent that there are motions, why don't we get through item 4 on the agenda and reserve them for then?
Okay.
So if you could proceed on 4C.
Okay, so with regards to item C, the whole premise would be, granted, the entirety of the grid is shifting, as Linda had indicated in her presentation, approximately 5.7%. What we would like to do is effective as soon as possible, whether that's September 1st or whenever the board next meets, to move our 3 individuals, or those 3 positions, I should say, positions, because some of them are still currently vacant, we move those from grid 10 to grid 11 currently. That's what the memo basically asks for. And then next year, should this compensation survey be put forward, they're just simply going to remain in grid 11. It's just grid 11 itself is increasing by the 5.7%. So the actual cost is minimal to do this. In fact, it's already going to be covered. The one thing that is a major change that I want to make sure that I explain to the board is that the other thing that I would like to change in this process is currently our sanitation workers are classified as 6.5-hour employees. Okay, so what that basically means is most of our employees are 8-hour employees. Forget police and fire for right now, but most of our employees are 8-hour employees. So what that means is they're compensated based on an 8-hour day. In addition, their PTO is generated based on that 8-hour day. So myself, Bola, what have you, when we earn our sick leave, we earn it in like that 8-hour increment. We take our personal holiday in 8-hour increments. Right now, the way that the sanitation department is set up is that it's set up on a 6.5-hour schedule. The problem with that is even when we determine what their hourly rate is, we're not dividing it out by what 6.5 hours would be. We're dividing it out by 8 hours. So even if they work their normal full 6.5-hour schedule based on the way that we're currently structuring them, they're not earning what the base wage is because we're paying them based on a 6.5-hour day rather than an 8-hour day. Additionally, their PTO is being accrued on a 6.5-hour day versus an 8-hour day. So the one piece of this document is to move them from grade 10 to grade 11. The other piece is to change them from a 6.5-hour employee to an 8-hour employee. And this comes from the ground up. I've been asked for this from a number of our employees. And I think where this initially started, it predated my hire with the city. I think at one point or another, the sanitation workers may have been a salaried, not exempt, but a salaried employee. And in order for them to qualify for loggers benefits, we had to have a minimum of 6.5 hours. Our guys are typically working 7.5 to 8 hours a day anyway. So this change just simply helps them with regards to the PTO that they're incurring. They're budgeted based on an 8-hour day anyway, so there is no change to the budget to change that portion. So I hope I haven't muddied the waters with that.
I'd like to make a motion to move the sanitation driver position to pay grade 11 and the sanitation employees be converted to 8-hour employees rather than 6.5-hour employees effective September 1st.
Second that.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All right, roll call.
Chairwoman Sims,
Yes.
Alderman Gould,
Yes.
Alderman Shelton,
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item 4D, fiscal year 2023 annual budget process, tentative calendar.
Do you need us to remain on as you go through budgets, or are you finished with questions for us?
It was my understanding that she was staying on about with regard to the sanitation.
Sanitation. I wanted to hear on sanitation. Are we done with the?
Well, you just motioned to approve it.
Right, but are we finished with the discussion of all the other stuff? Okay.
So, yeah, so I mean, I took it that the motion that was just approved concluded 4C on the agenda. Am I, so I think.
It did conclude C, 4C. But what do you want to do with A? I thought you wanted to do all the discussion,
Yeah,
then
I
come
would-
back and decide what the plan of action is.
Yeah, that's what I thought we were doing, but yeah, so if it's all right with the committee, can we just proceed with hearing on items 4E and F? And then to the extent we need to revisit motions with regard to 4A or others, that we can take them up at the end. Is that agreeable?
So that means Linda should stay.
Okay, then I guess that means Linda should
Okay.
stay.
Okay.
So, should I continue?
Yes.
Okay. Eric, would you come present the calendar? Thank you.
There we go. I feel always bad when I have to. Anyway, so one of the things Bull asked me to do this year was come up with a new budget timeline. And more than anything else is spread out the work and hopefully bring decisions to Ways and Means a little bit earlier. And what you guys are talking about tonight is a perfect example. If there's a change in the compensation or even the proposed personnel, then that's something that the finance department needs to help figure out as we go, and staff needs to figure out as we go through the budget process. So that way, when we bring you the final budget, and I think if we look at November, October, the first time is in October, it's already done. And we're not like, okay, this is great, but can we add 2 more employees? And then we have to figure out where we get that money from. So it's a way to help staff bring a balanced budget to you guys sooner. And it's a way to hopefully make some of these, spread out some of these decisions you guys have to make. So you kind of see it's laid out. We are actually currently working on revenue now, so that's great. And we're pretty close to being done with that. Robin's looking at some few things there. And the expectation is bring that to the September 1st Ways and Means Committee, have that discussion, and then be able to have the budget at October. Hopefully all those decisions are made easier, and then we'll be able to have a more streamlined budget process going forward. Maybe a little bit of bumps this year. It's a new timeline for everyone getting used to doing deadlines, but hopefully in future years it's nice and smooth and gets a balanced budget a little bit earlier.
Would it be possible to, as we go through the budget process with regard to the proposed additional hires that we're talking about tonight, can you call out, where we're finding the money for that? So, because I know, I read it from cover to cover, right? It's like my Bible by my nightstand, but given that these are, I think, material issues that just to see this is where we're finding the money.
Part of the budget process, so we're nearing where we will know just how much is available to fund things like this. And so part of the process is, oh, wait a minute, there's a gap. And if there's a gap, what do we do? And then we'll bring back the recommendation that we want to build into the budget and see whether you all agree with that or not. So that's the plan.
And I think part of it too is knowing the desire, especially with personnel, because personnel is a big chunk of the budget, obviously. If we know there's a desire to add positions, the positions are recommended by staff, while we might not know exactly where funding's coming from, we know that that's the desire, and we'll do our best to try to find that in there. And then if we can't, that's something we'll bring back to Ways and Means Committee. But we have a good understanding, I think, of where we think things are going to come from. Think use tax, and we'll go from there.
Regarding the classification of the lieutenant role, I was hearing that, would it be possible to go ahead and run I'd like to hear from public safety, but to run numbers, because if we decide not to do that, that's a pretty easy thing to subtract out, right? So, but, you know, in terms of what might come out of here in terms of direction, if for some reason, you know, the public safety, you know, feels very strongly about not doing that, we could, giving you direction to go forward with based on the recommendation, taking that out wouldn't be so difficult. Okay. So in terms of, it looks like, did you bake in some, I'm seeing, it looks like there's one additional meeting, so this would be, so you know, in terms of everybody getting out their calendar, is this what you're envisioning to be sort of the meetings that we'll need? I mean, if we get it done ahead of time, great, but I mean, I'm a believer in getting it on the calendar.
I know, I think last year we had a couple additional meetings. I just kind of plugged in the month of October for additional meetings as needed, trying to get all this done in October. So the November meeting could be the meeting when the budget gets approved and then taken to the Board of Aldermen. So it actually gives us an extra meeting for the first reading on the 21st and then the second reading on the 5th. And then we're not on that last meeting in December saying, oh, we have to approve something today. It gives us that little bit of a cushion there.
Okay, so maybe then by the September meeting, do you think that we might be able to identify specific dates? And I'm happy to cancel those meetings if we don't need them, but I know myself, I want every subject to get its due, and not the fact that I'm tired and cranky be a reason why we don't do. I vote no. Okay. Are there any questions with regard to schedule? Looks like a good flow to me. Unless you've got something.
Nope.
To add. All right. Thank you, Eric. Next item on the agenda is 4E, the Citizen Budget Forum.
So every year, Janet has been very helpful in assisting us in getting the word out to the residents about an opportunity for them to attend this meeting, submit their request in writing, communicate with the older persons at their monthly meeting, or any which way that they choose on what they would like to have the board consider. So I was looking at the polls today and I saw the ad in there. I know that we push that out also through Nextdoor. It's on the website. There's no one here.
Well, I guess I will take that as a endorsement of our hard work. So there isn't even anyone. I mean, I would recognize someone now if they had a comment on the budget process. But is there?
There's someone? Okay.
We do have someone.
Okay.
It's Karen Smith.
Okay. If you'd like to, I'd say come forward virtually if you've got your comments on the budget process.
Karen, you can speak. Karen, can you hear us? Oh, she put her hand down.
Oh, wait.
Nope, now it's up.
Heard her then. Now she's muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. I don't really have any comments on the budget. I was just gonna let you know that I was here.
Oh,
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. And then item 4F, which is the personnel requests. Is that?
I'm back.
Okay.
So again, as part of the budget process, department heads have a chance to ask for additional positions. Again, we want to get this conversation started early, so if it's the desire to move forward with positions, we can find the funding in the budget. So it looks like a number of positions come from a couple different departments. The first is the finance department is requesting a controller, which would be the primary contact with all business liquor license, as well as oversee cash management and reconciliation of bank statements. Probably really reducing the scope of what this person will be doing. Really, this person will be responsible for the day-to-day responsibilities being done by the finance director. So the finance director's job would be open for larger projects such as the audit, the budget, those type of things. Secondarily, is the police department. We have spoken about this in public safety, and with Brentwood Park, the new Brentwood Park coming on, the police department is requesting 3 additional officers, primarily to patrol the park and the new residential and entertainment areas that may be coming online. I think all 3 would be dedicated to just Brentwood Park is the plan by the police department. And then we talk about the police chief elevating the sergeants. So I know you guys have talked about that already, and it's going back to public safety. Last is stormwater and park. Again, this is something in response to the new park. The Parks and Recreation Department is requesting a horticulturalist, a new arborist to help with the plants and the trees in the new park, and then 2 laborers, a maintenance 3 and a maintenance 1. The maintenance 3, just a little bit more job responsibilities as far as making sure the playground's okay, making sure they can do repairs in the pavilion, those type of things. And the maintenance 1 would be kind of your bathrooms, grass, those type of stuff. So those have been talked about since 2019. And in fact, those were in the budget, in this year's budget. If you saw the 23 budget and the 24 budget, you saw the personnel costs go up. So it's something staff has been planning for a few years. So we're expecting that ready to go. So again, what we did in the finance, in the kind of the finance operations is talk about what those positions would cost, whether it's the current salary or the proposed compensation study being proposed by Higbee and Associates. So the controller is both around 84 to 80,000. Police department of 3 employees would be an additional $217,000 to 222, depending on the 2. You'll see we kind of did something about elevating the rank of sergeant and lieutenants. Again, in 23, it's about 19.5 if we increased with the proposed salary. And so altogether, Fund 10, you'd see somewhere between $317,000 to $330,000 of additional expenditures related to personnel. And as I said, we'd be looking at that right now. It'd be either additional revenue or cost savings. I think the thing we've looked at a little bit is use tax. We haven't really dedicated that to anything. I think we see our sales tax numbers looking good, and we're always really conservative with sales tax numbers, and we'll continue to be so, but there might be some benefit there as well. And Fund 50, it looks like it's about 233,000. Again, that has already been kind of put into the budget for this year. So we are expecting that if it moves forward. If not, that would just be additional capital funding for the department. So it's informational. It's really, like I said, the idea is to kind of guide the budget process to see if this is something that's worthwhile, if you want to kind of see what the numbers look like with them in, with them out. Be kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I've got a question about the proposed increases in the police and as it relates to Brentwood Park and any potential development that happens along Manchester Road. Obviously that may be delayed in its opening and launching potentially, and is that something that we need to take on for next year? Is there a reason to do it, closer to when we know there's a completion date?
Yeah, I think the good question, and we, Chief Speece would be able to talk about this a little bit more. But the idea, and maybe Major McIntyre, but the idea more than anything else is to have them ready to go in place and trained by the time the park opens. We're still looking at a spring/summer 23. I know some of the ideas of what Chief Speece wanted to make sure that they're kind of integrated within the entire department so that they're ready to go, fully trained, operational, completely part of the department as the park opens. There'd be somewhat of a similar sort of situation with the park maintenance staff because it'd kind of be the same sort of situation. Would we need them before then? Ultimately, we want to make sure we get them through the training process so that they're trained and ready to go. I don't think we would need 6 months, to be honest. I think as we get a firmer date, at least for the Parks and Recreation side, we'd look for a 2 to 3 months to make sure that they're trained and ready to go. So day one, the park opens, we're ready to go. Ultimately, at least with us, you can get in there prior to the park opening and making sure that the horticulturalists and the urban forester are looking at those things right away. I'm not sure about the police department.
So this is new that you've sort of joked with Bull about this the other day, like you bumped this up to us. So, like, it's really difficult for me I don't know how the finance department's designed, and I don't know what all the jobs in the finance department do, and I don't know, is this needed? The police and like all these things, I don't have any sense of how much an arborist, whether we need an additional arborist and what they do now and whether this is needed. And so it's really difficult for us as elected officials to weigh in on hiring staff that you all are in charge of running. So,
So typically, I would make those decisions. But I have certain staff members that get you all involved. That's why I thought, let's change the approach. Let's bring it here.
Honestly, if we were going to really evaluate this, then we should have every job description in finance and really figure out whether this is needed or not, who does what, how much time they spend. I don't feel like that's our job.
I'm inclined, we have people whose job if you're telling me that you need these roles, find out whether that's appropriate in the budget. I'm not HR. I'm not, so if I have to rely on our professionals.
I have made those decisions in the past, but it seems like more recently, the board wants to help with those decisions. That's why I'm bringing it to you.
Well, and that's where, if there's not enough money, which my hunch is there's not going to be enough money.
I can make those decisions.
Well, I think it's important to, highlight, these are the additional people we want to onboard.
Right. And if we're able to fund some, then you'll see it as part of the presentation. And if we can't fund them, then I create a list of what we can't fund in the budget for you all. As I don't even really have to highlight it. It's just part of the information we provide to you so that you know, unless you want to pull certain ones out and have a discussion and then direct staff, well, I want you to add this position and find a way to fund it. So if the direction is, thank you for sharing this information, we look forward to how you model it into the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget, I can take that on.
Well, that would be my personal preference. And now we know what the desired positions are so that if it comes to the budget and we're like, I want all the trees, I'm sorry, I really want an arborist, and I can push for that later. But,
right.
And I like this approach. I'm glad to clarify. I don't know the first thing about what arborists do, and I don't plan on finding out. So this is the ask.
Right.
And now let's see, I model it into the budget, and we'll see. I'm hearing that the next steps are, is this feasible? And then,
Yeah.
which I think is a
Right.
job for us.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. I just needed that clarification. I didn't want to bring the budget to you and then, when did this discussion come up? Why are you making this decision? So we're bringing it up front.
Yeah, I think there are key, this is a lot of money. This is a lot of staff. I think it's important to, everyone's wide-eyed now. These are the people that we're looking to hire. We'll see if we can do it. Alderman Shelton.
Can I ask a question of Chief Cottrell real quick? Just as we're talking about this, and I don't mean to get into another wormhole here, but I know there's additional apparatus potentially needed and additional staff. Is that pending development, or are you thinking that that's going to be needed for the park as well?
That is not currently on the table.
Okay.
That's pending the future of Brentwood.
Okay. So that would not be needed as of now?
Correct.
With nothing approved?
Correct. I know there was a line item listed in last night's presentation that highlighted that. That is for the future. That is not included in anything right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, just so I'm clear too, and I thank you, Chief, for clarifying that. I think that's important. It's kind of what spurred my conversation or question earlier about, are these personnel needed now, or are they needed eventually when we do get critical mass of things rolling out? Which it's good to plan for future, but I'm not sure.
They're not needed now.
I'm not sure they're necessarily needed at this point.
Yeah.
I did want to have a clarification on the arborist, horticulturist, and maintenance. Those are additional. We already have arborists, or do we have horticulturists and arborists now?
Yeah, we
correct?
have one horticulturalist who's responsible for all of the city's parks and public spaces, including in front of City Hall and the fire department, police department. And then we do have one urban forester who's responsible
Urban
for
forester.
all city trees, not just in the parks, so.
So these would be in addition to those staff,
Correct.
because you think there's going to be that much more work for them.
Yeah, I mean, the tree-wise, we're almost doubling the amount of trees that will be responsible within the city. And horticultural-wise, pretty darn close as well.
So I think in, what year was it? Was it 2020? When there was a presentation by the team, Craig and Eric and others, about what Brentwood Bound would look like, Brentwood Park. And the amount, and I think maybe you may have raised some questions, Alderman Gould, about what would it take to keep this looking
That's right. Yeah, I
like,
think it's
like
important.
it looks now.
So it doesn't.
Exactly. So
Terrible.
then there was a presentation by Eric on the number of personnel it would take and how it would be funded within the Stormwater Parks Improvement Fund and what that would mean to his capital expense. So what we could do is provide a link to that discussion so that it remains, current in our minds.
No, and I think it's
because
important. I mean, if we're going to build out public park spaces, then we need to maintain them so that they look the best that they can be. They can't be
Right.
overgrown with weeds
No.
and undesirable landscaping.
Right.
And
those
we do get
dates-
complaints from residents on how our owned, city-owned property, taxpayer-owned property looks. And I think it's important to make sure we're staffed appropriately to take care of that.
Right. So that's what this is doing, because the board already had that discussion. But at the time, how it was going to be funded was part of that discussion. So now we're there,
Okay.
or almost there, and we're bringing it back up.
And so I guess my question too is, as it relates to budgeting for next year, if we know that these folks probably don't need to be, these numbers are assuming starting
That's right.
from day one of fiscal year,
And it won't be.
and it won't be,
Yeah.
right? So do we need to
We
look
don't
at
need
a
to budget the
budgeting
full amount.
to where we say, we don't likely need to hire somebody until maybe 6 months into the
So
fiscal year?
budget for 6 months.
So budget for 6 months rather than budget for
We
a
could do that
full-
too, because that saves money.
It's more realistic.
Right.
I mean, it's what's really going to happen
I think the idea of showing the full year, more than anything else, would show the impact.
year over year.
year over year,
Understood.
Correct.
No, I get that.
Yep.
Okay.
And those
It's
states
just
have-
when we look at budgeting and things are going to be so tight, think every dollar counts. And, you know, yes, we need to look at, okay, what does this mean year over year? But as it relates to next annual year's budget approval, I don't want to make decisions on staff that we probably won't hire and then end up having to cut capital expenditures or something like that because we want to hold money for some staffing that we may or may not need.
No,
So that's-
we'll model the budget properly, but again, I just want to show the year over year. The dates of those presentations are in board docs if you're interested. They're part of the memo.
Is that your turf management presentation?
No, that's actually something else.
That you still
but
want to present to Public Works?
I have it. It's been a year and a half and ready to give that one.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of, you do you need a motion or direction that to model in the budget process, the compensation recommendations and the personnel.
Thank you.
Oh, I think yeah, Linda, I think, I think you're excused. Thanks for hanging on. Okay.
I'm dismissed.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so moving on, the next item is item 5, department reports. 5A is update on the financial impact of the storm from July 26, 2022.
So I've given this presentation at Public Works and the board last night, so I won't belabor it a whole lot. More than anything else, the important parts is that I did spend 4 lovely hours with SEMA and FEMA today talking about reimbursement and how that would work. FEMA is a 75% reimbursement of all eligible funds. So once we get through the process, if they approve, it would be a 75% reimbursement. SEMA says that they'll add 10% on top of that, which would leave 15% for the city to have to fund on our own. You know, so the next process is completing a very simple request for public assistance form that you have to do through the online grants.gov, and then we'll start the process of FEMA representatives will come out. We'll start looking through all the things. They'll let us know what's eligible, what's not eligible. We'll push for as all the damage that we've had, and we'll can still, at this point, still evaluating, still considering stuff. So we have 30 days from the time we put in our request to come up with our final list. So that's what we're kind of working on right now too. So we're kind of making sure we're looking through everything. We're going to look through, talk to staff about equipment, because that, you know, we got all the equipment rates today and what we'll be able to be reimbursed for as part of the days of, and then the cleanup after. So we're working on a lot of things right now, and hopefully we'll have good news in the upcoming months.
Alderwoman Tice?
Could I ask how our own city insurance overlays with this?
Yes, that is something that our insurance company is looking at right now. And ultimately what FEMA does is they take the insurance claim first, and then they pay on top of any insurance claim. Basically, they don't want to pay for extra money that the insurance is covering. The insurance company is looking at our policies and whether each facility has a deductible or some of the facilities are grouped together as one deductible. And that's what we're waiting to hear back from Chubb on, because that would make a difference. If Brentwood Sports Complex is $500,000 deductible, it's going to be hard to reach that mark, and then hard on each specific park. Now, if every park is $500,000, we might get a lot closer. And then FEMA would help out with that $500,000 deductible. That's the short answer.
Yep, thank you, that's perfect.
All right, 5B is progress report on the 2021 audit.
Good evening. Start off with full disclosure. So in the board doc information you received, we provided a timeline with completion for 8/31. However, late this afternoon, Andrew gave me a call back after he spoke with BOLA, and now that timeline has changed, excuse me, to September 16th. And it's due to some staffing issues, not necessarily issues, but some new hires for CLA, with some auditors that really have a lot of state and local government experience that would really help the city, and as well as some personal leave time for Andrew. With that being said, we do have an open list of items I received late today that had 15 items, and we whittled that down to 6. A lot of them were duplicates or things that were missed, but then a few of them are outstanding items that I've been trying to coordinate with a few of the department heads to get information back to the auditors. One of them is construction in progress. So with Dan being on vacation, that's going to impact us being able to provide that. However, we have reconciled the city's cash account, all the general ledgers, information and trial balance that they wanted. We were able to get that done. We have some samples that we need to pull tomorrow where they want to look at our construction escrow receipt sampling, and they also want to have a listing of our fixed assets and dates in service for a few things. So small items that we plan on tackling tomorrow. And that pretty much wraps up the city's portion that we need to get to the auditors. Any questions?
So are you saying that in terms of what they need from us, that should be concluded within
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow? And so then it's entirely in the lap of
Yes.
CLA to complete? Is that?
Yes, so what that looks like, to just give you more information about that, is them completing the financial statements and then going through the quality control review that they do.
And then, I mean, so I feel like they give us a date and then they don't meet the deadline. I mean, is September 16th, is that, I mean, has he looked you in the eye and said he's going to do that? I mean, it's just frustrating that we keep getting these dates.
Right.
And then CLA says.
I agree, and honestly, in my opinion, from what I've seen with the work that myself and staff has done, August 31st is doable, but I think for them to be assured with the quality review, they're asking for a cushion. I believe that it could be done prior to September 16th, but I think that's the date that he gave BOLA, just to be sure in the event that it happens after August 31st, to give himself some more time.
Why would he need 2 weeks or,
Usually the
almost 3
quality
weeks?
review takes about 2 weeks. We went through that with the 2020 audit, where the timeline for review to give their quality assurance is about 2 weeks, because either they do that at another arm of the organization or it's outsourced. I'm not really sure. I don't get that involved in their organization. They just give me high level what the process is. But I'm happy to ask any questions in the spirit of full disclosure and transparency.
Well, if you could just be just follow up with them. I mean, or, if you want me to pound the table and say I'm really mad, I mean, it's just been so long. I mean, we were told, it's not something I'm laying at your feet. It's frustrating that
Right.
they say that they're going to meet a deadline and then they don't do it.
All right.
Alderwoman Tice?
So, yeah, I'm frustrated with that, but it's already late. It's like, in my mind, this doesn't really matter. I think my bigger issue is, like, we got to get this right next year. And so whatever relationship we have with CLA to say, okay, you really helped us out, but next year it's getting in on time. Like, to me, that's the big, this is already late. So, unless,
Right. So we'll have that discussion later, not tonight.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, that there's everything, so we should be on target now that this doesn't happen again.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And is this a just a word of, oh, I think September 16th? Or is this a not to exceed September 16th and likely maybe get?
I'm not certain.
And is there any
because
contractual things that we need to?
I had that conversation shortly before coming in here, so.
I mean, I feel like they need to commit to not to exceed.
Right, yeah.
And then there's
yeah.
some,
It's gonna require a sit-down meeting, I believe, so I'll provide a deeper, more robust update at the next meeting.
I'm sensitive to the fact that if they've got new hires that have good municipality background, then yeah, it's fine, that's great for making sure that everything's managed and looked over carefully, but that's kind of not on us, right?
I mean, we're certainly compensating them well for their for their time. So I mean,
It's again, I agree with Alderwoman Tyson. It's already late at this point, but I just don't want this to continue to creep. So there needs to be a definitive, not to exceed type of thing, and then I don't know what the consequence is after that, but you know.
Well, they have a contract before me for the 21, and we're having the city attorney review it because there's some language in there that is of concern. So we need to build that into it and make it firm.
Okay.
Other questions on that topic? All right, I guess we'll move on. 5C is a financial statement for fiscal year 2022.
Okay. Tonight, I will present the June 2022 financial statements with the variance analysis that you all have become familiar with. The accompanying memo was also posted in board docs. And this is the part of the year that I'm really excited about because it's easy when it comes to percentages. Everything should be at or around 50%, making it really, really easy. And, you know, to look at those numbers all day long, over and over again, what I am most excited about is the revenue section. We have outperformed the budget projections in a few of our lines, as noted in the variance analysis. So I'll just go over those real quickly with you. The general use tax, excuse me, the use tax, we have collected over 35% of the projections for 2022, which is really great, really great. When it comes to the minor sources of revenues, and that includes things like, excuse me, trash services to citizens, fines, things of that nature. We have collected over 63% of those revenues. And since this report is through June, I believe we will definitely be in a position to maybe double our projections, perhaps. Because those, I can tell you for a fact that the trash services, a lot of the citizens are using them even before the flood. I'm always surprised when I see big billings come in per person, and none of the billings are lower than $400 a week. So we're doing really, really good. And the collections are up. We have an accounts receivable clerk in that position. Today is his 90-day anniversary, and he's doing very well. The training is going well. He's able to crank out the work really quickly, and we're on track to get things caught up in finance. So as he continues to develop his skill set and we can train him in the collections for other things that we aren't receiving payments for, I expect to see an increase in revenues there too as well. So overall, we overall in the general fund revenues are, we only have 36% to collect for the rest of the year. So if you take all the revenue lines in Fund 10, 36% to collect. I'll pause. Any questions there?
As it relates to use tax, I know when we budgeted for that, it was, generally conservative and see how it plays out. Do the trending that we see going on here, do we need to increase that when we start to budget for the next years?
It will still be conservative. If you remember, the mayor talked about talking to former Mayor Pat Kelly and how he shared what other cities that have had this for some time are seeing, like, in the millions, actually. But we started, was it shortly after COVID? So it was kind of slow, and then all the vendors catching on, oh, you got to report this to the state. So we had the first year, we budgeted conservatively 290, 295. But right now, I think July numbers show that approximately 700,000, and we budgeted 295. And that was through July. So we still have August, September, October. So I was sharing with the mayor this afternoon that it's very preliminary, but I can see us, and if Robin agrees, exceeding that 1 million, but we want to be conservative and budget for realistic numbers, what we think might come in. So a lot of the things that we are seeing requests come in, that most likely will be how we fund it. But if you remember, I think now 2 years that this has been in place, the board hasn't spent it. It's just been rolling into fund balance. So what is important as we start to spend the money is not to spend all of it.
Right.
So that you can't take on new projects, whatever, new positions in future years. The board has to be very deliberate about how that money's spent.
I agree. I don't want to, get too big for our britches on that and cause a problem. I just want to make sure that this isn't an anomaly in the trending that we're seeing, that we
Right.
can actually forecast that this is, and this, wasn't there a change with the use tax? And
Yes.
maybe that's why
Right.
we're getting
So
more.
we're sharing less of the percentage, we're keeping more,
Right.
but then the volume of that has gone up because, we can't tell you who those users are.
Right.
But and they're not just average people, they're corporations that are bringing in the bulk of the revenue for the use tax. But yeah, we're planning on being very conservative
So have we
with that
looked at,
number.
had that not changed, would we still be progressing or trending to meet the
I think
revenue?
there's a possibility of that,
expectation?
yeah. That has benefited, but I think because more corporations are ordering goods,
Right.
and the cost of things have gone up. So I think we're seeing that too. And if everything gets back to normal and there's no inflation as high as it is, we'll see that number come back down. And we'll make adjustments for that in future budget years.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting.
I also want to go back and note the first line, the general sales tax. If you look at the variance, we only have 8% to collect for the next 6 months. That's incredible, right?
Robin has reached out to the state because Cook and Riley has also indicated this is strange. We need to understand what exactly is going on. And so when Robin gets the response to that, we'll be bringing that back, because to see an increase in deposits of 2.3 million?
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
just unheard of.
2 months in a row. And the response has been, we looked at other cities close to yours, and it's consistent. Well, tell us why. So now it's not just, it's alarming and it's shocking, but we want to know the reason behind it so that we are prepared in case a mistake was made.
If I hear from a city, and in the past I would, Richmond Heights would call and say, hey, did you see a bump? Yeah, it was great. Well, it's ours. So, and sometimes the state doesn't catch it. So,
Or Whole Foods is just as,
that's
great.
true. So we're waiting to find out exactly a better explanation
No,
of
it's-
what's going on.
It's good.
That O.B. Clark's is. keeping
It's
us
O.B.
afloat.
Clark's, thank you.
So that's, I'm
Total
sorry.
line.
That's the report for the general fund revenue. But overall, General fund revenues are extremely strong, stable, and steady in the first 6 months of 2022. There are some lines, if you will note, where the collections aren't as strong, and we're working on identifying that. And then one key note, Bola, I didn't want to leave out. We're projected to receive our second round of American Rescue Plan Act funds this week. I'll go to the Capital Improvement Fund revenues. We have 47% remaining to collect for the remaining 6 months. Right now, we do not have any sale of city property to recognize for revenue. The expectation is it will probably happen closer to the end of the budget year. I think I report that pretty much every month. So that's related to when the new vehicles for the police are purchased and they can sell their older vehicles. Overall, we have collected 61% of the projected revenue for the Capital Improvement Fund. Any questions? So it's a little bit off, but I expect it to catch up as we go through the rest of the year. Economic Development Fund, 44% of the projected revenues remain to be collected. Stormwater and Parks. Okay, so the issue here is it looks like the revenue is behind, but if you account for the Brentwood bound, that's the reason for that overall percentage looking higher than what it should be. But if you look at the individual lines for stormwater and parks, revenues are pretty much steady in the first 6 months of the year. Sales tax, we have 45% remaining to collect for the next 6 months, along with a few of the other lines. And then the $500 that's budgeted for revenue for sale of city property. Eric assures me that they definitely will collect all of that. The minor sources of revenue, if you look at the actual versus the budget, we have collected, we've exceeded projections by 4%. Any questions there?
When we presented to Public Works after the tour of the sports complex, I think Eric had indicated that we would not be able to have all the leagues. So that revenue, we won't be collecting all the leagues that typically pay at the sports complex. So you'll start to see that go down in months to come.
And then for Sewer Improvements Fund. Sewer Improvement Fund, we have 78% of the revenue to collect for the rest of the year. Any questions about revenues? I'll move on to expenses. The total general fund has 53.6 of the budget remaining for expenses this year. So for the first half of the year, we're fairly close to being in alignment with the budget allocation. Most departments are managing their budgets very well. Some are doing extremely well, although I do expect spending to pick up as we go towards the end of the year. But overall, at 53.6%, we're right on target for expenditures in the general fund. Capital Improvement Fund, 71.4, similar for the Economic Development Fund. So they're a little bit below what we should expect for half of the year at this reporting point. 68% of the budget remains for stormwater and parks, and 73.1 for the expenditure budget for Sewer Improvement Fund. Any questions? That concludes my report. Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes Any changes? Seeing none. That'll be approved by acclamation. Item 7 is old business. 7A is the continued discussion on requests for proposal insurance services consulting report.
Any questions? I'd like to think that we've provided, with the assistance of Thomas McGee, more of the answers to the questions. So I don't know what you want me to do. Review each one, answer questions? Is it missing
Well,
certain?
I guess does anyone have any questions on the report that was provided to us that will be available? I mean, I feel like we've just, I don't know what more we could do. Alderwoman Tice.
So I read through this. I thought it was very thorough. Thank you for the time that you and Thomas McGee, Thomas McGee
right.
spent putting this together for us. And so my opinion is, and I think we've beat this so hard, and unless we can hire someone to, like, originally what we were talking about, to reevaluate ours versus what we should have. I think you all have done a really good job, and I'm satisfied at this point.
I agree. I mean, I guess it's, Charles, I guess I didn't realize I picked the wrong profession. I should have gone into insurance analysis. Apparently only one person does it. And he's busy. So, I mean, I don't think, I mean, I took this as informational.
That's all it was.
You don't need
Yeah.
I don't think you need any action
No.
from us at this
No.
time. I suppose if if Charlesworth mind or,
Shows up, I'll just block him.
yeah. So, yeah, but I think we vetted this issue as best as we could. Okay, so we'll move on to new business. Item 8A is the discussion on a proposed time change to the Board of Aldermen's summer month meetings, specifically the months of June, July, and August.
I brought this up sort of joking, and it was before we had the meeting last night, where we were here half the night. So I brought it up just for summer. I think 6 o'clock's too early for all the meetings. I know just in chatting with Alderwoman Sims, we also want to make sure that the meetings are still accessible to the public. So if, I just don't want to be here half the night, but if that's if being here half the night's best for the public, then I'm happy to do that. I did notice a lot of people walking out last night, especially older people. So they didn't hear probably what they came to listen to because the meeting went on so long. So, but I just have a friend. I mean, it might be nice, but I'm not married to this.
I'm inclined, I mean, just for the summer months, since those meetings tend to run long, I'm inclined to do 6. My only concern would be, citizen participation, as long as they can, because I think 6 is harder. 6 isn't. I work across the street from here, and I live across the street from here, so it is not a problem for me to get here at 6 p.m. But if you're coming from work and 6 is hard, but it's just 3 meetings, and so long as they're otherwise, they can listen, and I guess if they want comment, I mean, I think Zoom can fill that gap for 3 meetings. I'm inclined to support it for the summer, provided that virtual options are in place.
I agree. Everything's more accessible now, so it's not like you have to rush here right away, and we're still allowing people to join online. So I think it's a great idea for the summer months.
Yeah, so it would have been 10:30 instead of 11:30 that we concluded last night.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that 6 is not, I mean, 5:30s are tough meetings, but I couldn't ride my bike this morning today, to get to the meeting because I was hustling to finish up work and get here on time. 6 is a different story. I think it's also, we need to bring up the fact that it also probably alleviates our staff probably needing to stick around later and later and later. So the long meetings aren't just on us and the residents, but we would allow our staff to go home earlier. So I think that's good.
So
You guys are here a long time,
Yeah,
all the time.
So I guess at this point, Chair would entertain a motion to set the summer meetings, June, July, August, Board of Alderman meetings to begin at 6 instead of 7.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion by Alderwoman Tice and a second by Alderman Shelton. Is there any further discussion?
One question.
Alderman Gould?
Yeah, so this doesn't create any conflicts with precedents or whatever, like, for timing for the rest of the year. So we don't start getting into, oh, well, I never knew that was going to be changed, because it's always at 7.
Oh, someone will say that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Without question, someone's going to.
Yes, we will publicize
We'll need to
this.
communicate this.
It'll be in the newsletter,
very
it'll be in the
clearly.
polls, it'll be on the website, it'll be announced at the ward meetings, coffee with the mayor, whatever else.
Or maybe even, I mean, I think
year.
going into summers, maybe we look at a summer door hanger or something like that says, hey,
That's a lot.
Our citizens for the whole year.
For a lot, for the 10 people that show.
Yeah, right.
We can look into ways, I think we have a good head start if this is approved by the Board of Aldermen.
Correct.
To get the word out.
I think it makes sense, but I do want to make sure
Yeah,
it's communicated.
right.
It does.
We'll place it in your able hands.
Yes.
Okay, further questions? All right, do you need a?
Roll call.
Okay, roll
Yes.
call on that one.
Okay. Chairwoman Sims,
Yes.
Alderman Gould,
Yes.
Alderman Shelton,
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great. Next item on the business, 8B, quarterly report of ambulance fee write-offs.
Yes, good evening. This is just procedural. We started this at the end of first quarter earlier this year. This one is considerably higher. It grabbed my attention, and the April write-off summary that I received accounts for about 2/3 of the dollar amount. They had write-offs from 2017, a large bulk from 2020, 2021. So I don't know the exact reason why they had such a large dump in one single month, but that explains the $30,694.51 total for the second quarter.
Do you ever consider, I'm not going to take the business, but, finding some attorney that would take this on a contingency and having them send a demand letter? I mean, and that
So
they.
that is part of our billing policy. Our third-party vendor does have an arm that assists with this. It reaches points that we have to do this procedure, though, due to restrictions in our contract. They have asked us to loosen that up, which we will consider that when we go out to bid again for billing services. I've had very good conversations with them, but Brentwood's language prohibiting that right now.
So this figure is the result of already having done that analysis.
Correct. We have a short time frame. They're asking us to lengthen that time frame.
So are you saying that at some point there'll be a renegotiation of this contract? And
Oh, for sure. We're in the third year of a 3-year agreement. We certainly intend to present, I believe in September, Public Safety, an extension of our agreement with EMSMC. But yes.
I've never seen it, $30,000 is one thing versus in the past, it seems like it's been like $3,000. I mean,
It was, right. First quarter was around 8,000. So yeah, without the April dump, it would have been consistent as well.
okay, well, I guess at this point, Chair would entertain a motion to approve the write-off report as stated in board docs and to forward such on to the Board of Aldermen for approval.
So moved.
Okay, there's a first and a second. Any further discussion, questions? Seeing none, roll call.
Chairwoman Sims.
Yes.
Alderman Gould.
Yes.
Alderman Shelton.
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great, okay. Item 9 on the agenda is citizen comments. Has anyone muscled through to the bitter end? There's no one in the
There is
gallery and
no
there's
one.
no one virtually wishing to address the committee, so we'll move on. Seeing no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.